Hi, everybody. If you're looking for the New York Media Meetup, you are in the right place. Starting to see some folks trickle in here. So we're just going to take the first couple of minutes to go through a couple of introductory and sort of housekeeping items. But as you can probably see, we are joined here by our fantastic panelists, so Vanna, Hilary, and Walter. But just to start things off, in terms of admin, there will be a Q&A portion at the end of the panel. So the last 15 minutes, we're going to devote to Q&A and just use that kind of handy Zoom link at the bottom to submit any questions that you might have. And we will do our very best to get to them in those last 15 minutes. The other item I wanted to go through before we get into the discussion is just introducing myself and the meetup, because I know a lot of folks are probably here for the first time. So we just want to make sure you have the context in terms of where you are and what we're all about. So my name is Colao. I founded a PR agency called Haymaker that works here in New York. And we work with mainly tech and CPG companies. So Eventbrite, Oatly, Gympass, G2, SoftBank Robotics, and others. The one plug I will say during this entire hour is we're always looking for great folks to join our team. Also always looking to talk with great companies if you're interested in potentially working with us. So don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I am jj@haymaker.co. And then a little bit of brief background. I started my career in media as a reporter at Forbes. So I actually overlapped with Vanna at the old newsroom in Greenwich Village. But then left and started the firm and started this meetup about 9 years ago at this point. So if you enjoy what you hear today, we are going to do many others. We're doing our first in-person meetup in about 3 or 4 years at the Newmark School of Journalism in New York. So that's going to be on October 25th. We'll release more details in the coming days and weeks, but hope you can mark it on your calendars in the meantime. So with that, want to make sure that we start to get into the panel here, and we'll just do some brief introductions for each of the panelists, and then we'll get into the discussion and some of our questions. So first, we are very lucky to be joined by Walter Thompson, who is an editorial manager at TechCrunch, and there he oversees TechCrunch's guest contributor program, which includes TechCrunch Plus, articles and opinion pieces about tech-related issues as well. Previously, he was at a number of startups in content and community roles, was the city editor at Hoodline, also the host of the Golden City podcast about San Francisco, and he is joining us from San Francisco. So really appreciate having Walter here. We also have Hilary Krieger, who is the opinion editor at CNN Digital. And I mean, everybody here is very busy, but judging by the amount of op-eds that I see on CNN Digital, I'm sure you were very busy as well, Hilary. She has an incredible array of newsroom experience over the course of her career, including time spent at NBC News at 538, Politico, Washington Post, Jerusalem Post, and Marketplace. And she is based out of New York. And then Vanna is a senior editor for contributors at CNBC Make It. And before joining CNBC, Vanna was at Thrive Global, also a senior editor at Inc., and of course at Forbes, with also previous stints at the New Yorker and at Vogue. And she is based out of New York as well. And we were talking about restaurants right before this. So with that, would love to start out and basically just hear a little bit about your respective purviews, kind of a day in the life, what you're responsible for, what your mandate looks like, and kind of start broadly, and then we can go a little bit more deeply. So I'm going to go in reverse order here, and Vanna, start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm senior editor at CNBC Make It. For those who are unfamiliar, Make It is a vertical within CNBC.com. We mostly cover, a lot of our audience, our content is geared towards millennials and Gen Z, but like everyone on CNBC, we get promoted the same way on the homepage about how to be smarter with your money, your career, and in recent years, we've really ventured into lifestyle stuff, which I think a lot of publications have done the same because it's just work and life, big overlap. And yeah, so I work with contributors. I have a team of 2 people. My own little plug, we're hiring. We're hiring an editor, so if you're interested. And yeah, it's fun. We work with, we didn't have like a contributors network before, so it's been building for the past couple of years, but.
Awesome. And plugs are very welcome, panelists, if you need to plug anything. One question, just to follow up on that. What does the scale look like in terms of, contributed pieces that get published per day or anything else that feels relevant in sort of painting a picture of that part of the org?
I would say it's a big part of our editorial content. So like the same way that we have like the money team, the careers team, the contributors team kind of publishes its own, like the same amount of articles in terms of cadence. I'd say like we aim for at least 1 to 2 a day. 2 is a bit ambitious, but as like the other contributors, editors, you guys know, it takes like a while to see a piece from start to finish. But yeah.
No, that's pretty serious. I can certainly imagine. So that's very helpful. Hilary, how about you? Would love to hear about everything going on at CNN.
Well, thank you, first of all, for noting that I might be a little busy now because I'm actually dealing with the impeachment latest, and I apologize, but I might have to do a little bit of multitasking here. So I'm, as I said, an editor in the opinion section, and I focus on politics, but I work on stories that range from tech to wellness to personal essays on all sorts of topics to economics to arts and culture and pop culture, so across the board. We run at CNN, I'd say about somewhere between 3 to 8 pieces on an average day. There are maybe a quarter, a fifth or a quarter of those are sort of more dedicated regular writers and columnists, but outside contributors are certainly the majority of the people that we run. So we're always looking for great people. And I'd say the big thing is that we really want things that are giving us unique perspectives on things happening in the news, because people obviously are turning to CNN to see what's happening. And then we're hoping to provide that extra perspective of like, and why is it happening? And what does it mean? And where should we go from here? And those kinds of questions. So we interpret opinion pretty broadly to basically mean pieces that have perspective. And so each day in the morning, we're talking through what's in the news, what do we need to have something on, what could be a good angle, who could do this, and then it's sort of a mad dash from there throughout the day to get pieces actually out and up and on the site.
Just to understand what your day looks like a little bit more, and totally understand as well if you need to look at another part of the screen, to glance at impeachment news or whatever it might be. 3 to 8 is quite a lot per day. Is that what's passing across your desk? Is that part of what the overall team is looking at?
Yeah, it's the team as a whole. Okay. So yes, definitely. I'm not responsible for that many pieces myself. Thank goodness, I would die. It's very much a team effort. We have about 8 editors here. So I guess it would average to kind of a piece a day per editor, roughly, but it's very much dependent on the news and the topics. And sometimes we want to do a big project, like we're doing some big stuff on AI that's going to take up relatively a lot of time versus something very quick on like incremental stories on the latest with the Trump legal battles that we're going to churn out faster.
Right. So depending on the news cycle, may want to accelerate the pace a little bit just to make sure that you're keeping up with the conversation and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And so we have a big mix. And like I said, we like to have news involved with sort of everything we do, but that doesn't mean we can't have evergreen stories that are looking sort of more broadly at issues that have to do with, we had a story right off the bat about the kiss that was given to the soccer player in Spain and talking about some of the dynamics, but then we had another piece a week later that talks just more broadly about the issue of women in soccer. So we do a lot of, second, third day, week stories that can sort of zoom out and don't have to be as immediate.
That's always a helpful lens, in terms of the day one, day two, and how different topics can fit into the conversation at different times. I think I'm very glad that you mentioned that. Walter, would love to hear about everything that you're up to over at TechCrunch as well.
Sure. I manage the guest contributor program, which is basically twofold. There's TechCrunch Plus, which are business-focused articles aimed at early-stage startup founders and investors, and those are behind a paywall because they're business-focused, and they're really much more about giving people actionable, tactical advice they can actually use to build and scale their companies. And then the other side of that are TechCrunch opinion articles, which are something that we had going for a while, and then we kind of took it down, and we resumed the program earlier this year. And those are basically non-paywalled, free-to-read articles that are about tech-related topics in the public interest. And more or less the guidelines we've actually revised the guidelines. If you just Google TechCrunch editorial guidelines, you can find for both programs. But basically the goal is twofold. One is to get the most diverse range of voices about tech topics we can possibly get. There's not a lot of tech is fairly homogenous as far as demographics. And so it's really great to get a lot of different perspectives on both sides, whether it's like the paywalled stuff or whether it's like issues in the public interest. But then also the other side, as far as just the business articles that are not opinion pieces. My other goal is trying to basically level a playing field for people who don't have deep business networks. Maybe they didn't graduate from Stanford, or they don't have like a mentor, or they don't know all these people. And so my goal is trying to bring things down to earth a little bit, kind of level set. And so if you once you're in the room with an investor, here are the kind of questions they're likely to ask. Here are the kind of questions you should ask them. Here are the kind of things you should have in your pitch deck that are kind of how-tos that make you a little more bulletproof or resilient as far as prepared to talk to people you wouldn't expect to talk to otherwise.
That's really helpful, and that actually helps to segue into some of my next questions. But same question as I asked some of the other panelists, which is, would love to understand the volume and what your team or you are responsible for in terms of putting out each day.
Sure. So it's just me. I work with a part-time copy editor who just does straight copy editing, but I kind of most of it it's about, I would say, 90% inbound and then 5 to 10% outbound, depending on the week, I suppose. But most of it is just people who can, people know we are looking for, always in the hunt for it. So I guess on any given day, we usually run one paywalled guest post. Mm-hmm. And then maybe now that we're back up and running with opinions, it's about 3 to 5 times a week. But although my goal is basically, we were kind of, when we were operating at peak capacity a couple of years ago, we were doing 2 to 3 paywalled guest posts a day. So my goal is to get back to that. But it's really more, it's a quality issue. I'm sure everyone knows, like, the volume's great, but you want to keep quality as high as you possibly can. And so for me, I'm not sure, I'd love to hear how other people work with the process, working with contributors. But usually, I would say 95% of people get a hard no, just a pass. But the people who don't get a hard no, if it's sometimes it's a yes, but usually it's a qualified yes, where it's like, well, this is good, but if you can amplify this section here, or if you can cut everything above here and then break this out to a standalone post, it will really create much more value. So we do a lot of back and forth and kind of working with people to kind of bring their post to the right level where it's ready for publication. But I'd love to hear how much of that, like how much back and forth the rest of you have the other two editors on the call do as well.
Yeah, and I would love to as well. And we can definitely get into that in short order. What I was going to kind of piggyback off of in terms of what you were talking about, Walter, which I thought was a great explanation about sort of the point of having these contributed pieces up on the site. And in your case, for example, that's to make sure that, one, there's a diversity of points of view, and it's not just the standard, Stanford founders getting all the attention. And two, it's sort of democratizing some of this really important, actionable, tactical information that is maybe locked up in companies and in executive brains, so that, again, a broader audience can access some of those tips and make sure that they're also putting the right things in their deck or thinking about user acquisition in the right way, et cetera. So I think it's really helpful to kind of ground this discussion in that overall point, in TechCrunch's case, serving readers in that way. And Hilary, you kind of touched on this as well in terms of getting other voices to chime in on the news cycle and provide different perspectives. Vanna, I would love to hear about how CNBC Make It thinks about this, because I'm sure it's in some ways, similar in terms of TechCrunch and CNN, but would love to understand that with a little bit more texture and how these contributions kind of serve the broader, CNBC Make It readership.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we didn't have contributors before I started, so it was very much experimental, and it was like a huge success. Like a lot of our contributed pieces do extremely well, and I think a big reason is that people do like hearing from, like, instead of having the reporter interview like the subject, somebody who built this, who turned their side hustle into like a passive income empire, because those, like, people are really loving passive income stories right now. Instead, like, I think when it's reported, it can sometimes be a little dry, whereas if you kind of give it to the person who is actually living the story and like doing it and like giving it a voice, I think people respond a lot better to it. Also, like, it's fun to play around with the headlines in first person. Like it has that like lifestyle-y feel to it that I love in like fashion magazines and stuff. So it's nice to see it from like a business perspective. So yeah, people really respond well to that. Did that answer your question? Like, some of what you said kind of cut in and out, so I wasn't sure if I got it.
Oh, I'm sorry if that's the case, but it does, and I think it's interesting because you're alluding to something that I didn't previously think about, which is, instead of this veil, instead of there being a go-between in terms of the source or the source material or whatever it is, this is a primary source kind of talking through their experience, and you're, cutting out the middleman who may be the reporter in this case, which we don't always want to do, but sometimes I can see the value there. It's first person.
Totally. And I will say, like, what I love hearing from the people that I work with is, I mean, once they write a story and it just, like, let's say it goes viral, they get so happy and they want to write more because there's this really lovely engagement that happens between them and the reader, because I always, I want them to have their bio at the end of the story and link to their social media accounts. And so they'll see this influx of like followers and people sending them DMs and saying, hey, I really loved your story. And so there's that, it's like, it's just nice to be able to interact directly with the subject versus like reading about them in a reported piece, which I love as well. But like, you get to directly interact with them and have this like relationship if you want.
Yeah. We've gotten into, maybe we've touched on it a little bit, but more directly, I would love to hear what makes for a fantastic submission for each of you. And Hilary, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to you for this next question. Like, when it crosses your desk or shows up in your inbox is maybe more likely. What does that look like? What gets you excited? Or on the contrary, what makes you roll your eyes?
Well, first of all, people put in that it's a pitch and they give me in the subject line a really good headline. That's great, because first of all, it catches my attention. It also means that you understand that we're an argument-driven place where we need a really strong headline if you're gonna, in terms of what you're trying to present. I think the things that really stand out are when either you have a really strong and unexplored take on something that everyone's talking about, so we know we want to weigh in on it, but you have a really, a unique argument about it, or even better, if you're a person who as Vanna was talking about, has the sort of personal experience with the topic at hand. So it's not simply that you think X is bad, but you've lived that experience, and so you know why it's bad because of what's happened to you. We get a lot of pitches from experts, and so there are ways you can have, we have outside contributors on a lot of different potential sources of outside contributors. But I think the things that are most eye-catching normally are ones that where the reason that you're writing this piece is because you have some specific firsthand experience or thought that's going to distinguish you. Expertise and credentials and all of that, being able to back up what you're saying is essential. But the first thing is, why are you, the best voice to be talking to this? And what do you have to say that is going to change how people think about it and other people don't have access to as ways of thinking about the topic?
That's very helpful. So you're a domain expert, something is happening in the news, people are talking about it, and you're kind of sitting there and going, everybody's missing this really important thing that I, as a domain expert, have unique insight into. That's the kind of person that you're looking for. You're looking for that missing piece.
Right. But again, it doesn't have to be that you're, a scientist who's done research on a certain topic, which would be the case for certain types of, say, medically driven pieces, but it can be from your own life experience of what you've gone through. So if you've gone through the topic, I was talking about the soccer kits. Well, if you've been on the field and had somebody accost you, you are in a position, if that happened in front of 1,000 people watching you, very few people are going to have had that specific experience. So that makes you sort of an expert voice on that, even if you don't, say, have a background in, sexual assault or that kind of thing. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a certain degree. It means that you have to have some personal connection. And in fact, I think it's very important for us that we're not sort of gatekeeping by closing the submission files down to people who only have gone through certain paths and only have certain things on their resume. I want it to be as broad as possible and have as many different perspectives and different walks of life. So I would never want a person to think that they couldn't submit because they don't have a certain background. It's really about that personal connection to the story.
It's a great point. So it's not just domain expertise, it's lived experience as well. Walter, you went into this a little bit in a way that I thought was great, but I would love to hear maybe some more kind of top examples, if you don't mind, and the kind of stuff that really gets you excited and is a fit.
Sure. I mean, they basically, if someone, so for the TechCrunch Plus side, the business articles that are really focused on early stage startups, if someone has a topic or a personal experience that can literally help somebody else solve a problem. A lot of the problems that startup founders face, they're pretty universal. How to hire somebody, how to lay somebody off, how to get into a room with a founder or with an investor rather. They all kind of face a lot of the same problems basically. And so it's best, I would rather, we don't really do a lot of articles that do focus on basic best practices because you can find that information any place. What I look for are basically, it's kind of funny, the most popular tag we have in our articles that I write are the how-to, because people are looking for basic, how do I do this? How do I figure this? How do I figure this out? How do I cross this chasm or this how do I solve this problem? But also how-to has a certain how I did it kind of perspective. And so people basically, I really ask them to kind of dive deep and kind of go into their personal experience and not just give me the basic happy talk you give to an investor, but also okay, here's the time we actually face planted and made a terrible error that cost us 6 months of time, but here's how we worked through it. And so some of the best articles that I give people as far as exemplars, what we're looking for, there's one where someone wrote an article. They had a software company, they were trying to expand to Japan, but they had no presence in Japan and no network in Japan. And so they figured out how to have a no boots on the ground expansion strategy in Japan that actually worked. And so they shared their to-dos with me as far as the steps they worked, sent me a picture of some dude they hired in a mascot to go to events in Japan and we used that for the featured picture. And it was useful because people actually connected with it. It had the ring of truth. Another one that was really more on the opinion side though, it was a story, op-ed written by a Black startup founder. And he basically went through, and this was one of the longest op-eds we've ever done because it was kind of really went into his history, his personal experience. But he talked about his journey as a founder trying to raise money and how it was just not just the doors that were closed to him, but basically the techniques he used to get around those challenges that he wanted other Black founders to know. And the reason why it really did well is because we do a lot of articles about the lack of representation and how hard it is, and the fact that I think last year Black founders got 1% of venture capital, and women got, I think, like 3% or less. So like these problems are like well understood. We report on them really well. So rather than an article that simply describes the problems, an article that actually helps you, like, here's the tactics and strategy you can use to get around this issue so that you can get in the room or you can be more successful. That's what people are looking for. So like another good example would be this was actually a business article written by a woman op-ed who she basically got pregnant for the first time during her fundraising phase for her startup, and she couldn't put things on hold. So basically, she had to come up with a plan as far as how do I, almost like a product announcement, how do I roll out to my team that the news that I'm pregnant, and how do I give this information to my investors and hold their confidence. And she basically like outlined a like 10-point strategy that she used that worked for her, that she was pretty sure will work for other founders in the same boat. So basically, I'm looking for like those kind of how I did it kind of things that, again, like Hilary was saying, like they're drawn from your personal experience, but you don't have to be an HR expert to write a plan about how to tell everyone. And then again, this is like, again, startup land. It's like you're talking about a largely male team. And so here's a woman who basically needs to let her male team know that she'll be, changing her availability in the office, and here's what it means, but so you want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And so like these are the kind of things I'm looking for. They're good stories, but they're also like helpful how-tos that people can actually put into practice after reading.
That's great. That's really helpful. And so it sounds like probably already, but if not in short order, at some point you will have collected all of these really helpful, actionable tips, informed by lived experience from founders who've been through it. And if you're a founder going through just about anything, you can probably look through and find a really great, first person example and set of experiences that will inform how you should maybe, approach that problem. So
Sure.
that's very powerful.
But like I also just want to say, but like also on the opinion side, it's not just the whole how-tos. Like we're also looking for like for example, there was a woman who was, I think she was lived in Palo Alto, where Stanford is, and she's legally blind, but she's an activist for people who are disabled as far as like consumer electronics, because oftentimes these products are not really developed with that constituency in mind. And so she wrote a really great piece with like her experience, like talking about these consumer products that we all take for granted, but how her experience of them is very different than ours. And it was one of those things that, because like that perspective isn't really on our staff, that article did exceptionally well as far as traffic and engagement, because it was one of those things that you just didn't see on TechCrunch usually, because it's very much like, here's a new technology and it's from a positive sense. But because we don't have every single lived experience in our staff, we can't give you that story. So yeah.
Very helpful. Vanna, it's been a while. Sorry to neglect you, but would love to hear about how all of this works on the Make It side, because in looking through some of the submissions, there's a variety in terms of health and psychology, and as you said, kind of passive income. So we'd love to understand the through line for all of those.
Yeah, I mean, we get so many submissions. I honestly, I can't read through all of them or respond to all of them. But as Hilary said, if you have this great headline that's very, we like to say, make-it-y, it means you've read our content and you have an idea of like what we cover, what our readers are interested in. So that's like a sure way to get me to like read through the email. Yeah, if there's some, I think, so I have a very small team. We have one other contributors editor that I work with, and then we're hiring another one. But we're a small team, we're scrappy, and a lot of the times we'll get together like at least once or twice a month and do these like brainstorms. They're kind of like on my wish list of what I would love to publish, and they're not like exact headlines, but they're like, this is like a direction we would like to go in. So I always have that list handy. And if I'm reading a submission and something that you submitted is not exactly, like, let's be honest, most of them don't like get the green light, but you might say something in there about yourself that makes me think, oh, this pitch doesn't exactly work for us, but this person you know, they like in their pitch they wrote, and this is an example, they retired and they were really bored and very restless, so they started this company, and this is what they're doing, and their pitch is kind of the company. Like the company hasn't really been successful yet. We don't really know where it's going, so there's not really a story. But I had on my wish list, like just an angle about what is retirement actually like. Like, you know, is it great? Is it fun? Like, do you actually get bored? Is it kind of depressing? And it seems like there's something that could align here. So I asked him, why don't you write about your experience in retirement and how you unretired and like what motivated you to start this? And so the whole the assignment turned into like just that, and the headline was something about like I unretired at X age, and you know, and here like X things that no one talks about in retirement. And then he talks about the company, but it's not exactly about the company. It's about that like more interesting part of his life that I think can be interesting to anyone, like someone who isn't in the startup world, who's just thinking about retirement. So it kind of like applies to such a broad range of readers. So yeah, I guess like I don't always, I mean, like the pitch might not be exactly there, but if there's enough in there where it seems like there are interesting details that you could write about that kind of relate to it, that could work. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
It definitely makes sense. And I would love to get into that actually. And what I mean by that is kind of the process. So all of you have alluded to your inboxes. It sounds like a lot of this starts there, which makes a lot of sense, headlines, et cetera. What do you prefer? Is it a finished draft? Is it an outline? Are you disqualifying folks if it just doesn't, you know, meet the bar on the first pass? Is there a sort of threshold where you're willing to put in some more time to get things to where they need to be? Because again, I completely understand that time is limited just given all of your responsibilities. So yeah, would love to understand kind of start to finish what that looks like and your preferred processes for each of you. And Vanna, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah. So once, if there's a story there that works, I'll usually respond and I'll say, you know, like this is great, or like how about this? And I think the first few back and forths are like I'll give them a headline to, but we never really use that headline. It's just a direction because I think that writers find that helpful. And I will send them a few examples to go off of. I'll tell them like what our word count is, like don't go over 1,000, don't go over 800. And we'll start with that. And then, you know, I'll sometimes like, if it's their first time writing something, they've never written anything before, I'll kind of give them an outline, like in the intro, like this is kind of what you want to include. And then the body, like I'll ask a few questions just to give them, it really makes my job easier when I found that when I give them like this like layout, and then they'll send me back a draft. And then, yeah, it usually, I would say the editing process takes about like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, depending on the complexity of the story. And then, yeah, I mean, I'll ask them what their preferred, like editing process is. If it's like a Word doc or email, I'm fine with either. And then I'll just send them back things in like bold, and it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward.
I'm not gonna lie, that sounds very generous to me in terms of your time and some of the hand-holding.
Yeah, I put work into it because I've worked with people with contributors that I've really enjoyed, and I think they've enjoyed the process too because they keep writing back with other pitches. And that's kind of the goal, is that once you put a good amount of work into someone, they get it, and then the process is just so much quicker moving forward. Like, you know, I'll keep them in mind for another story, and then I'll send them the pitch, and then they'll write it, and it's worth it. But yeah, it is pretty generous. But I've done it. I do it so often that like it doesn't take me as long as it sounds.
Sure. And just to be clear, in terms of that starting point, it sounds like you're okay with an idea or a headline and not necessarily starting with a full draft right off the bat.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hilary, how about you?
So I think if you've never written for us, then a draft is always better. It's hard to commit to taking a piece without seeing the draft. The challenge has a lot to do with timing, that we're trying to move quickly. And if there's a big thing that something's talking about, everybody's talking about, we're going to have people that we're already lining up. So I'm definitely open to people sending me a pitch and saying, this is what I'd like to write. This is when I could get it in by. And then I can sort of have it in the mix, but it's very hard to actually commit. So a lot of times I'll say, that sounds great. I can't commit till I see a draft. If you want to put it together, you're welcome to, but you also might do that work in vain because we might have to turn it down. So I understand if you don't want to do that. So just try to give people as much information about what that's going to look like. But the draft certainly makes it easier to accept because it's much clearer. And it depends a little bit, if you have a real subject expertise, in law on a certain specialty and we're looking for something and you had a couple sentences and we know we want something, that's a little bit easier to accept without the full draft. But if you're talking about something very personal and the whole story basically rests on how you write and how you tell your story, seeing how that goes is really important. It's really essential that people who pitch are open to edits. That's just we don't, there are some publications that don't do much editing. CNN is not one of them. We also have several layers of review, and it can be frustrating as a writer. It's frustrating for me as the editor, but we have to be, really thorough with our editing. And so it's always helpful when writers say, I'm very open to edits. And if you're not, I totally respect that. Don't pitch to me, pitch it somewhere else. And I agree. So I don't do as much as Vanna does in terms of giving an outline, but I certainly will often take a piece and say, I like this, but I'd really like you to focus more on this. So can you take a second shot at sort of expanding on this part and losing this part, and then we can work off of that. So I'll give some sort of big picture direction before sort of diving in to do the line edit.
That makes a lot of sense. And what was interesting about what you mentioned is you need to see the draft, can't commit before seeing the draft, but there is maybe a chance not to necessarily kind of hold your place in line, but to at least give you a sense that, okay, there's somebody here who says they may be able to talk about this topic. I can kind of file that away, but not commit until they actually send over the draft and deliver on that promise.
Exactly, because we're having conversations throughout the day about stories and what we're working on. And so, it's just good to know there's a potential thing in the mix, just as we're thinking about how we're dividing our resources and that type of thing. So the earlier you have an idea, the better in terms of reaching out. But again, it really then is important to specify when you would actually be filing a draft, and also how, your openness, not just in terms of your philosophy about edits, but actually your time. Because one thing that's very hard for us in terms of working with contributors is that understandably, mostly contributors also have other day jobs. And so we have to have them have time to go through edits and know that, they're going to prioritize that, which I know can be very frustrating, but it's just a part of something that has to happen before we can publish it. And if we're trying to be timely, knowing that, you have availability and that you can put this at the top of your list, that's really helpful to know.
Yeah, totally makes sense. After I left Forbes as a staffer, I was a contributor for a little bit, and I got kicked off because I did not submit enough because I was busy with my day job, and that happens. So I totally understand that dynamic. Walter, you have very well-defined kind of guidelines and a process outlined that I encourage everybody to look at on TechCrunch. But would love to hear, just in your own words, a little bit about that as well.
Thanks very much. Yeah, there was really it was kind of a lot of work putting those guidelines in place. The program that I manage now, the contributor program, was kind of managed kind of ad hoc before, and so it was kind of relationship based. If you knew a reporter, you could submit a draft, or if you knew the right person, and they could get it aired, or maybe they would just approve it and put it on the site themselves. And so when I came on board, we kind of created a little more structure for the whole thing, so that we had like they're going to one place, me, and we have one set of guidelines that everyone is. There's more transparency, I feel like, and so people know what's more expected of them. I will say this, like so everyone, I do try to work with people. I think I probably work along the way Hilary does, with kind of like giving people kind of directional feedback as far as this is good, and if you cut these 5 sections and leave this one last section here and expand that into a standalone post, then we can talk. I'll take another look. But I never agree to run anything without seeing a final draft first. We will accept detailed. Somebody can send like, hey, I've a detailed outline. I'll accept that for review, but I still want to see a draft. They can send me a synopsis that's like a proposed headline and a paragraph. I'll accept that for review, but I always want to see the full draft. But I will say this is kind of, I not to be negative, but like there's one thing I'm not looking for, and JJ, I think you probably know what I'm about to say, but basically, I am not looking for thought leadership. There's like that line that Jack Nicholson has, and we're full up, like because we thought leadership is not thought leadership to me. These are hot takes. These are personal essays that show that you have a command of the topic, but don't necessarily benefit somebody else after reading. It's just more of a, I want to weigh in on this thing today because it's a hot topic and I have a hot take on it, and I want to bolster my credibility on it, or I want to go and have something on my O1A visa application that looks good for me when I'm trying to present myself as an expert, or there's a million reasons why a person wants to write an article that other than I want to share what I know about this topic. And so when someone sends me thought leadership that is basically only meant to burnish their own credentials and not meant to deepen my understanding of the topic, that's an easy no. So I'm full up. Please don't send it to me.
I think it's good guidance. I mean, what comes to mind for me is basically just LinkedIn fodder. Like if it's something that you would see on LinkedIn or related to, that feed, it's probably not a good fit for you, it sounds like.
If you're quoting Gartner in the first 2 paragraphs, go back to square one and start over again. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So no magic quadrant references
please.
And those sorts of things. Well, that's very helpful. And just a quick kind of plug for the Q&A function. We have a bunch in here. Some we've already addressed. I do want to get into those in a couple minutes. So if you have any questions that you have not submitted, be sure to do that now, and we will try our best to get to them. But this is maybe just kind of a fun one, and we can do it relatively quickly before we get into audience questions. Who is your dream contributor, or either just as an author, or maybe author and topic, or topic, whatever kind of comes to mind, something that is either, within the realm of possibility or maybe crazy. I don't know. So Vanna, we're going to go back to you, if that's okay.
That's a really hard one. I don't know. I don't have one right now. Yeah, come back to me. I'll give it some thought.
I'm going to leave it to Hilary or Walter if anything comes top of mind to either of you.
I'm going to totally dodge and say that I try not to work with people who are my dream contributors, because inevitably they disappoint me at some point in the editing process. And I like to keep my illusions intact. So, it's who's a great contributor depends very much on the time and the topic and all of that. But somebody that you love from reading them externally, you might not love working with them. So I try to protect my bubble in that sense.
That's pretty funny. It's sort of a never meet your heroes kind of thing.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
I would say from my perspective, there's no person, but I mean, I would say this. If I could get anyone to write about anything technical and explain it to a mass audience, I would love to resuscitate or revive Carl Sagan, the late the physicist from Cornell, because he was. I grew up watching, like, he had a great show called Cosmos. So I was like maybe 9 years old or so in the late 70s, and it brought me into science, maybe interested in science, because he brought everything down to a level where a 9-year-old could understand it and be interested, and it wasn't insulting. And to me, that's good writing. If they can make it, if I can make it understandable to anyone without them feeling condescended to, then yes, send it my way.
Yeah. I will say one, I don't know that he was a hero, but along the lines of Carl Sagan. So I did meet Bill Nye once, and he was everything you would hope Bill Nye is, and I think hits many of the marks in terms of what Carl Sagan fulfilled, during his lifetime, but maybe not quite in terms of writing and that sort of thing. But that is an aside. Vanna, did anything occur to you?
I mean, Fred Rogers, if we're talking about bringing people back.
Yeah, we can resuscitate anybody. This is the world that we live in hypothetically right now. Well, that's great. And thank you for kind of playing along with that. With that, we will get into a couple of audience questions. So a lot of the folks in the audience, I would guess, probably on the PR side. So some of this is tips and tricks and how to best reach you, how to not annoy you, those sorts of things. Allie Mills is interested in hearing about the state of your inboxes, how many pitches you receive per day, what percentage you actually respond to, et cetera. So, Hilary, I'm going to start with you, if that's all right.
Yeah, I couldn't give you a number. It's a lot, and I hate to break it to PR people, but if I see that it's coming from a PR person, which I can usually tell, it's not going to get high priority because the chances of it being a fit for us are just much, much lower. We really don't want self-promotional content. We especially don't want promotional businesses, and we have a lot of concerns about conflicts of interest. So I would say, if you're doing PR and you want to be considered, the best thing is really to help your client draft an email where they can put into their own words what they want to be saying and what they're going to do. So first of all, I have confidence that they're writing the piece, not a committee of PR people, but also presenting it as actual the content of an op-ed, not just sort of some top lines about how great a business is or how this person can talk on the latest news, because I'm not looking for that. And I would say the other thing that can be frustrating about PR pitches, because they do come in so often, is it feels like sometimes people don't understand what we do. So I get people will write and say, if you're interested in an interview, we don't do interviews in the opinion section. So I would when a person who's never written before and sends me their pitch and it's totally off the mark, I'm very forgiving about that. But if your profession is PR, please take some time to see what our section is, make sure that we have had that content. We do occasionally do Q&As, for instance. They're very rare and very unlikely to come. They don't come through PR people, but you could point to that at least to be I know you did this QA. This is why this could be similar to that, those kinds of things. So I would say if you're doing this professionally, really get a sense of what we publish, how your client could match the content we produce, and then help the client do their best job at putting themselves forward as a good voice on whatever the topic is.
Great guidance all around. Walter or Vanna, did either of you want to weigh in on this?
So if a good day for me, if I'm super productive and don't have a lot of distractions, I can reply to maybe 110 emails, written replies. A lot of those are, kind of canned, but I try to reply to as many as I can. As far as the percentage, our pickup rate percentage wise, it's hard to estimate, but I would probably say probably 95% of the submissions we receive are just rejected for just structural reasons. There's not a good fit, or they're overly promotional. They're just not a good fit for us. And then of that 5%, the take rate is probably half, this is good enough to go with some editing. And then the other half of those, there's some back and forth with a couple of exchanges. But I will say this, if I get into a conversation with someone as far as this could be better, and if you work on these things, those almost 80%, we publish those. We almost never pass on something where we encourage someone to go a little deeper and work with us on something. So that's I'm just trying to put it out there. It's not a guarantee, but it's almost always a good sign.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Vanna, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I get so many PR emails. I don't respond to most of them, but I will say that if you're pitching a client, well, one, don't say a lot about nothing. That's something I found with a lot of PR emails. It's like, it's a lot of data points, which is good, but some of it is just so irrelevant. Like Hilary said, like read the site, see specifically the types of people that we invite to write, the topics. And then I would say what's more important for, like in the bio sections, include as much of their credentials, interesting things that they've done. Like every single word matters. So, let's say they're like the oldest practicing doctor, like that's something that's interesting, like keep it in there. Maybe that'll catch my eye and relate to something that is on my wish list. And maybe that, like, it's rare, but that's an instance of when I am like more likely to respond and ask for more information about.
This is all great guidance, and something yeah, of course.
Which reminds me, just and part of the problem, of course, is like what I'm looking for is really different from what other people are looking for. So you hear 30 different things from 30 editors, and then you're just screwed when you're trying to send out an email. But I would say, for us, we publish op-eds. We want something very specific. So when I see like a big like intro and a photo and like resume, I'm like, this is like not like, we're not looking for that. We're looking for a very specific topic. We want to know what you want to say. And yes, the credentials are good to know why you should be the one saying it, but it's the idea, not the person or the sort of general concept. So I'd say, for us, being very specific about here's what we want to, the argument we want to make in an op-ed. Also, I would suggest that you stay away from the term byline because that is not used among journalists. Only reporters have bylines. And so when I get an email that says, do you want a byline? To me, I'm like, oh, this is a PR person because we don't use that terminology. So I would be really careful that the jargon that you use in the industry is not the words that you're communicating to an editor who wants jargon-free copy in their publication. So that is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know why it bothers me as much as it does, but it really does. So since you said there are people who are in PR listening, I'm taking this opportunity to get that out there.
No, it's a great point. I am just running through my own emails to you all and the copy that we have on the event page. I don't think byline exists in there, so I'm grateful for that, but we'll definitely make a point of keeping that out of the vocabulary going forward. So we only have a couple minutes left, but two questions I wanted to get to because I think they're interesting and maybe of the moment, and related. But one is, how sick are you of hearing about AI? If not, that's great too. And two, do you see AI, ChatGPT generated content come to you? I hope not, but maybe. And I had not thought of that. So anonymous attendee asked. I was going to give them credit, but yeah, we'll leave it there.
Oh, do you want an answer or?
Would love an answer.
Oh, sure. So personally, I don't know. At TechCrunch, I have a flat policy of I will not accept submissions that contain material generated in part or in whole by generative AI. We look for it, try to detect it. I can usually spot it off the bat, but we look for it. So yeah, we're trying to level the playing field. We want actual people to be. I can shorthand this for you. To me, there's very little difference between thought leadership and stuff that comes out of generative AI. It sounds exactly the same to me, which is why it's a red flag. So.
No, I would assume as much. But it sounds like you see it, and this has happened and has probably had to have been quashed.
As far as I know, we haven't published any yet.
Of course,
I'm knocking wood because I feel like because I'm not bulletproof. I'm just one person. So at some point, I imagine someone's going to sneak one past me, but it hasn't happened yet, and I think I got a pretty good nose for it. But maybe I'm just flattering myself. I don't know.
I would guess not. I think, as somebody, if you work in words every single day, most hours of the day, I think it's pretty apparent when there's a ChatGPT generated piece of content that comes your way. I certainly believe that you all have the ability to scope it out and have scoped it out if need be.
So far.
Yeah. so far with this iteration, at least.
I would say that, yeah, we certainly look for it. We'd obviously never publish it, except in some sort of experimental, like just having fun with it kind of way where we'd be very clear to readers. But I'm definitely not maxed out in AI. I think it's fascinating. I think it's going to continue to be one of the most important topics for us for the near future. So I certainly am not in any way opposed to AI topics. However, we're doing a big project, as are most publications. So again, I would really urge anybody who's submitting about AI to look at what we've done already, because if we've done it or it's similar, then it's going to be an automatic no. Also, I am sick of people shoehorning their topics into AI. It's very common for people to shoehorn, into like the day's headlines. And I'm actually okay with that because that is our bread and butter. So if you're trying to shoehorn into impeachment and you can do it creatively, we'd probably say no, but I'm kind of interested to see how you can make the point you want to make in that context. But with AI, I'm not interested in that. It's too broad and we have had too much content on it. So if you are pitching on AI, it has to be very specific, very distinct, very of the moment, / very personal. And again, here's another case where if you've had an encounter with AI, this is something our society is just starting to grapple with. So if you are an editor and you got duped by AI, that could be a really interesting story.
Yeah.
So the personal experience of it is a good way to think about it, but just as a sort of broad entry point to a story, not great. But as a topic, it's very important and will be important. And there's going to be new angles and stuff to explore for a while, for sure.
Makes a lot of sense. Vanna, I imagine maybe not so interested in AI over at CNBC Make It, unless maybe it's a path to a passive income or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think actually one of our story that did really well for us was about ways to make passive income through AI. I think what makes a good AI story for our audience is not so much like thought pieces about it, but practical angles that introduce it in a very easy to understand way. Like in that piece, it pointed out to some resources that you could go to learn about AI if you have no idea what it's about. So that I'd say that's the path we would go down.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm still very open to AI related stories on the opinion side and on the TechCrunch Plus business side. For the business side articles, though, we're really looking for, and again, like as Hilary said, please do see what we've already published. Everything's tagged, so you can actually sort through tagged articles and find everything sorted that way. But yeah, make sure we haven't done it or already covered that ground. I would say that for the business stuff, it's tactical, actionable stuff. One of the top articles we've done so far in AI was about a team that used ChatGPT to generate content strategies they actually put into place for 6 months and apparently saved like a ton of money and didn't have to hire people and actually were able to develop useful ideas based on like the generative AI. And then also the other side of that is like legal analysis, not the trend stuff. If it's like a trend thing, AI could do this or could take your job away. We're not looking for those things. It's really much more about tactical strategies and big nuts and bolts kind of stuff.
Yeah. We are at 1 minute until the hour. I am going to ask one last question, sort of rapid fire, and then we're gonna get out of here. But Roger Johnson asked, what role, if any, does a person's social following play in accepting their content? I think sort of the implication being, okay, this person has a big following, maybe they can get serious distribution. I think I know the answer, but does that matter to you all?
Flatly no.
Yep.
No.
It doesn't matter in terms of accepting the pitch, but it's always a plus because it gives us more of a chance of the pitch of the story when it publishes reaching more people. So like, it's something you could mention, but it's not, the story is going to rise and fall on its own merits.
Yeah. Well, do want to thank everybody who submitted questions. There were a lot. I think we got to a lot of them over the course of our discussion, but I do apologize if we weren't able to get to yours. And most of all, I want to thank our fantastic panelists. So Vanna, Hilary, Walter, really appreciate all of your time. I know you are incredibly busy, so thank you for giving us an hour. I know the audience got a ton out of this. So I hope you have a great evening, afternoon for you, Walter. And yeah, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
JJ.
Yeah, pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks very much.